chloroquine. It actually has very serious side effects. President Trump kept saying, "What do you have to lose? Take it." Well, there's actually quite a bit to lose. It has potentially very serious psychiatric side effects. It can cause, in some patients, cardiac arrest. And there is evidence to suggest that it may have lethal interactions with a common diabetes drug. And we should note that more than 10% of Americans have diabetes, and many of the states that are most likely to be impacted by the coronavirus, like Louisiana, also have some of the highest rates of diabetes. And diabetes is a pre-existing condition that can put someone at greater risk already of being endangered by the coronavirus. So people have been curious as to why the president has been so aggressive in his support for hydroxychloroquine. Today on Twitter, people have been speculating that it might have something to do with the fact that hydroxychloroquine maker Novartis had paid Michael Cohen $1.2 million in 2017 to ostensibly gain access to the president. Novartis has denied that there is any connection between this payment and the president's enthusiasm over the drug, and Novartis has, in a public statement, said that they will be donating any of the drug that is used for the coronavirus. But nevertheless, we've learned that the president has ordered 29 million doses of hydroxychloroquine to be purchased for the Strategic National Stockpile. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, and now Rudy Giuliani have been hawking the product on Fox. And today, Peter Navarro expressed on his support for it and poo-pooed cautions from Dr. Tony Fauci, saying that there really is no hard evidence to show that the drug is helpful. Peter Navarro, citing his doctorate in economics, suggested that he is qualified to weigh in on the medical value of the drug. The fact of the matter is there have been 3 limited studies, 2 in France, 1 in China. The France study showed nothing clinically meaningful, no difference in death, intubation, or heart failure, but it did suggest that it might speed the recovery time. And the other 2 studies are also inconclusive. Dr. Fauci keeps refuting the idea that this should be used widely until there has been an active study on humans with the live virus. Now, the president has also been using these briefings to try to do some revisionist history on the timeline of the coronavirus in the U.S. In fact, it was a question about the timeline from the Associated Press that set him off and drove him out of the room yesterday. So I'm going to run through the timeline just a little bit while we're waiting for the president to come out. But I would also like to use this time to answer some of your questions. So if you can type your questions in the comments, members of our team will pull them and find answers for you. And we'd like to use this time as constructively as possible. We have been bringing this interactive component to the briefings because the president does not always spread factual information in them himself. And we want to keep you informed, but we want to keep you informed with accurate information. So just to review the timeline a little bit, back in 2014, the Obama administration sought to make it a priority for national security to be prepared for the risk of a global health pandemic. And President Obama and his team created the Global Health Security Unit within the National Security Council. And President Obama's team also created a 69-page pandemic response playbook so that basically no future administration would have to reinvent the wheel. They would take what they had learned from Ebola and H1N1 and SARS and just provide any future administration with a step-by-step recipe for this is what you do if there is some sort of global outbreak. Whether it was President Trump's desire to reject anything that President Obama did, or whether it was general confusion or something else, President Trump's administration did not consult this playbook when the coronavirus showed itself in the world. Now, during the transition in 2017, Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, says that she repeatedly warned President Trump's incoming security team that it was their estimation that a global pandemic was one of the most serious threats to the nation that would be likely to be faced. She called attention to the 69-page pandemic playbook and did everything she could to warn the incoming administration. It's important to remember this because President Trump likes to use the phrase, nobody could have seen this coming. It was seen coming. Also, reporting from Ken Klippenstein of The Nation says that the Pentagon had flagged the potential shortage of masks, hospital beds, ventilators, and other equipment to the Trump administration in 2017, saying in a report that the most likely and significant threat is a novel respiratory disease, and warning that with the current levels that were stockpiled, the U.S. was not ready for such a thing. So again, these were warnings from the Pentagon in 2017. Remember that when President Trump says, as he is likely to say today, no one could have seen this coming. Now, in 2018, Trump specifically fired the Global Health Security Unit from the National Security Council. He has since denied this, but earlier this year he acknowledged it in a February briefing. He suggested that he did it for cost-saving reasons, that you didn't need the Global Health Pandemic Unit when there wasn't a pandemic. Again, when he tells you that no one could have seen this coming, there were people working in the White House National Security Council who could have seen this coming, and he fired them. Now, new reporting from Reuters suggests that the White House National Security Council learned of the new threat from this disease and learned of what was happening in China on December 31st. There is some discrepancy as to whether the first report came on December 31st or January 3rd, but essentially, as of the beginning of this year, the National Security Council within the White House had been warned that there was an emerging epidemic threat in China. So again, when President Trump says no one could have seen this coming, his administration was warned by January 3rd at the latest. On January 8th, the CDC issued its first warning. On January 9th, President Trump held a rally. On January 14th, he held a rally. On January 18th, the Washington Post reports that Secretary Azar of Health and Human Services tried to have an urgent call with the president about the crisis, but that President Trump reportedly cut him off to berate him about his handling of an attempt to ban vaping. And then, after hanging up on the secretary, President Trump went golfing. On January 19th, President Trump went golfing again. On January 20th, South Korea reported its first case of the coronavirus. Now, when President Trump says, we acted so much faster than anyone else, we have a direct comparison because South Korea diagnosed its first case on January 20th and immediately set to work on implementing widespread testing and had widespread testing in place within the first 2 weeks. The first case in the U.S. was diagnosed just 1 day later. Watch what happened. So the first case was diagnosed on January 21st. On January 22nd, President Trump was asked whether he was worried. He said, no, not at all. He said, quote, "We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China. It's going to be just fine." Now, at this point, we've learned that there were roughly 14,000 people coming a day, travelers from China arriving in the U.S. per day, after the U.S. was already aware that there was an epidemic in China, after we already knew of the first case of the coronavirus in the U.S. People kept continuing to come in, and the president said he was not concerned. On January 23rd, China shut down Wuhan. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called for a public health emergency. President Trump did not enact it. January 27th, again, when Trump says no one could have seen this coming, presidential candidate Joe Biden, who had been part of putting together Barack Obama's Global Health Security Unit, wrote an op-ed warning that President Trump was already failing to respond to the coronavirus. But the next day, January 28th, Elizabeth Warren released her coronavirus plan. That night, President Trump held a rally. On January 29th, only then was a task force formed to address the coronavirus. At this point, the State Department was working to bring home 6,000 Americans in Wuhan, after Wuhan was already shut down because the coronavirus was so widespread there. On January 30th, China announced a lockdown of all of the province of Hubei, of which Wuhan is the capital. The World Health Organization declared a global emergency, and President Trump held a rally. We know that in late January, Secretary Azar and the Department of Health and Human Services requested $136 million for fighting the virus. The White House refused this request. On January 1st, Trump golfed. On January 2nd, only then did a partial travel restriction on China go into effect. President Trump said, quote, "We pretty much shut it down." But this was just a partial restriction. This was a restriction on non-citizens. U.S. citizens were still free to come and go. And as I said, there were thousands of travelers from China coming on a daily basis all through January and February. So this is a classic instance of shutting the barn door after the horses have left, to use a folksy expression. We know that in the previous month, before President Trump put these travel restrictions in place, 300,000 people had come into the U.S. from China. Now in February, the disease began popping up all over the world. On February 5th, Secretary Azar upped his request and asked for $4 billion to fight the virus. The Washington Post reports that this request led to a shouting match in the White House. On February 6th, the World Health Organization announced that it was distributing 250,000 coronavirus tests around the world. The U.S. said it didn't need them. It would produce its own. The CDC at this point produced a total of 90 tests, which turned out to be faulty. On February 10th, President Trump said, "A lot of people think this goes away in April, when it gets a little warmer. It miraculously goes away," unquote. At that point, there were 12 cases in the U.S. We are now in April, and it has not gone away, and there are over 340,000 cases in the U.S. On February 15th, Trump went golfing. On February 19th, Trump went golfing. I'm sorry, on February 19th, he didn't go golfing. He held a rally. On February 20th, he held a rally. On February 21st, he held a rally. On February 24th, only then did Trump ask Congress for additional funding. But he tweeted that day, "The coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. Stock market starting to look very good to me." February 25th, February 25th, President Trump tweeted, "CDC and my administration are doing a, all caps, great job of handling coronavirus. I think that's a problem that's going to go away. They have studied it. They know very much. In fact, we're very close to a vaccine." That was on February 25th. More than a month later, a vaccine is still over a year away. February 26th, President Trump said, "You treat this like the flu. The risk to the American people remains very low. The 15 cases in the U.S. within a couple days is going to be down close to zero." There were actually 60 cases in the U.S. that day. February 27th, President Trump said, "Like a miracle, it's going to disappear." February 28th, Trump held a rally where he called media coverage of the coronavirus, quote, "their new hoax." There were 63 cases of the virus in the U.S. at that point. The very next day, the U.S. suffered the first death from the coronavirus. That day, Washington State declared a state of emergency. That day, President Trump imposed a ban on travelers from Iran. March 3rd, President Trump said things are going very well. We were up to 124 cases that day. He also said on March 3rd that he didn't think it would spread across the country. Only on March 3rd did the U.S. approve a plan for widespread testing. March 4th, President Trump told Fox News that a lot of people would go to work with the virus and that would be fine. They'd just get better on their own. And he said that it was, quote, "very much in hand." We were up to 158 cases that day. The next day, March 5th, California and Maryland declared a state of emergency. The following day, March 6th, Kentucky and Utah declared states of emergency. President Trump said, I think we're doing a really good job in this country at keeping it down, a tremendous job at keeping it down." And he said, "Anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test. And the tests are beautiful." That was on March 6th. That was 1 month ago. It is still difficult for most Americans to get a test. Today, my wife has been fighting a cough and a fever. She seems to be recovering, but we have no idea if she has been fighting the coronavirus, because like most Americans, it is simply not true that if you want a test, you can get a test. On March 7th, New York declared a state of emergency, and Trump went golfing. On March 8th, Trump golfed again. On March 9th, he compared the coronavirus to the flu and suggested that it would go away on its own. On March 10th, he said it's really working out. It will go away. There were just under 1,000 cases in the U.S. at that point. On March 11th, he shut down travel from Europe, which his Deputy National Security Advisor had been calling for 2 weeks. On March 13th, he finally declared a national emergency. Again, remember this, when he talks about how swiftly he responded, he knew about this from at least January 3rd and didn't declare a state of emergency until the 13th. On that day, he said that Google was building a website, which was apparently news to Google. This website still hasn't happened. He said that Walmart was turning its parking lots into test sites where people would be able to go and get drive-through tests. This still has not happened. On March 16th, he told governors in a phone call that they were on their own. Respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourselves, he said. Governors of both parties have flagged that as a result, they have found themselves in bidding wars with each other in a race to try to get equipment. On March 17th, Trump called it a pandemic for the first time and said, quote, "I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic." On March 26th, Trump made good on a new version of his promise of America First. America became the leading country in the world for coronavirus cases, with exceeding China and Italy at that point. On March 29th, President Trump delivered the most sobering words that he had yet. He and his team revealed that models suggested that in a best-case scenario, between 100 to 200,000 Americans would be killed by the coronavirus. He then went on to brag about the ratings of his press conferences. On March 23rd, he upped the best-case scenario to up to 240,000 American deaths, roughly 4 Vietnam Wars. And now we are at the present day, where there are over 356,000 cases of the coronavirus, and where, as of today, more than 10,000 Americans have died. And the president continues to warn us that in a best-case scenario, we are looking at 100 to 240,000 American deaths. And we wonder what would have happened if the president had acted more quickly. Trump's former national security advisor, Susan Rice, says that Trump's slow action has at least added 10,000 deaths to the toll. We won't know exactly what would have happened if we'd acted sooner, but if we look at South Korea, which adopted widespread preventive measures at the same time that the U.S. became aware of its first case, we see that they have the virus roughly under control. They have had a total of 186 deaths. Now, adjusted per capita, we should expect U.S. deaths to be a little less than 10 times South Korea's, but the estimates that President Trump is laying out are 1,000 to 2,000 times the deaths of South Korea. So the president will be coming out in any moment. I see that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx have come out. The briefing room is more sparsely populated than it used to be. The president's briefings still do not resemble the briefings of governors. Governors have been working to stand at least 6 feet apart from their teams. President Trump has been standing very close to members of his team. All right, we have some questions, and I'm going to try to answer a couple of them before President Trump comes out. Shemaine asks, all right, well, Shemaine asks whether this is going to impact the elections. And what the impact will be on the elections is unclear. But as we have been reminded today, the president does not have the legal ability to postpone or cancel the elections. Now, we're going to hear what he has to say, and our team will live fact check as he speaks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We have a little bit of an audio delay. I apologize for that, but the
This
audio
week,
is coming
America
in.
continues our aggressive effort to defeat the virus. As we enter a crucial and difficult phase of the battle, we continue to send our prayers to the people of New York and New Jersey and to our whole country. But right now, New York and New Jersey are very hot zones, and we're with them, we're with everybody. Your struggle is our struggle, and we will beat this virus. We will beat it together. I also want to send...
Now, the president says to New York and New Jersey, your struggle is our struggle. We will beat this together. But he has also repeatedly attacked states and suggested that they should be on their own. He has mocked Governor Cuomo's request for 40,000 ventilators, as the governor feels is needed, and has suggested that it is the governor's responsibility to get these ventilators and not the federal government's.
We have made tremendous progress on therapeutics. I had a fantastic call today, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. And I've asked two of the leading companies, these are brilliant companies, Ebola, AIDS, others, they've come with the solutions and just have done incredible jobs. And I've asked them to contact London immediately. They have offices in London, the major companies, but more than major, more than size, they're genius. And I had a talk with 4 of them today, and they speak a language that most people don't even understand. But I understand something, that they've really advanced therapeutics and therapeutically, and they have arrived in London already. Their London office has whatever they need, and we'll see if we can be of help. We've contacted all of Boris's doctors, and we'll see what is going to take place, but they are ready to go. But when you get brought into intensive care, that gets very, very serious with this particular disease. So
the president is referring to the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who has been moved into intensive care because of his coronavirus.
Incredible results. We're working with the FDA and everybody else, but we are working with London with respect to Boris Johnson. Across the country, we're attacking the enemy on all fronts, including medical, scientific, social, logistical, and economic. We're pressing into action the full power of American government and American enterprise, and our military has been incredible. We've just sent 3,000 public health personnel. They're now deployed in the New York area, and they'll be...
The president keeps saying that he's using the full force of the government, but he has been reluctant to fully engage the Defense Production Act, which would enable him to order and coordinate and manage industries across the U.S. and have them make personal protective equipment and medical equipment that is needed now on the front lines of the pandemic.
Jersey, Governor Murphy, we spoke with him a little while ago, and New Jersey is going to use it also because New Jersey is a hot spot. So Governor Murphy and Governor Cuomo are going to be using the ship, New York, New Jersey, and
the president is correct when he identifies New Jersey as a new hotspot. New Jersey is the second most infected state in the nation. Only New York is ahead of it.
The Javits Center, which is 2,900 beds, just built by our military, also is going to be manned now by the military, and they should be in place tomorrow. And they'll start sending quite a few people over to the Javits Center. It's convenient. It's right in the middle of everything. So that'll be something great. And we appreciated Governor Cuomo's really nice statements, and likewise Governor Murphy. We have worked very well with both of them, and with, frankly, all of the governors. Vice President Pence had a call this morning with them that lasted for close to 2 hours, and I understand there wasn't
I'm going to fix this audio lag, and so please bear with me. As I said, we are doing this without the benefit of our studio. We are all working from home.
their federal government has been doing for them. And you'll hear what that is, and it's rather amazing, actually. Nationwide, the Army Corps of Engineers is building 22 field hospitals. These are big hospitals, and alternate care sites in 18 states. So you have a combination of 22 field hospitals. In addition to that, we're building alternate care sites, which is a little bit of a smaller version of the hospital. And we have a lot of them, and they're going up in 18 different states. In total, we have deployed 8,450 hospital beds from federal stockpiles. And, if you think this is done over a period of weeks, it's incredible, actually. More than 8,000 ventilators have been sent from the national stockpile to our cities and states, backed by the Defense Production Act, which we've used very strongly, very powerfully.
The president has not used the Defense Production Act very strongly, very powerfully. He's been very reluctant to put it in place, and was very late to put it in place, as the governors of New Jersey and New York have pointed out. The president has finally ordered GM and one other manufacturer to start making ventilators, but any ventilators that are starting to be made now will not be ready to help the patients who need it on the front line of the coronavirus.
States, we are, wherever that monster goes, we're able to move with it. Great flexibility. We have tremendous flexibility, and we have people waiting, and they're ready, willing, and able, but waiting to bring them wherever it may be, if they need it, It's possible that they won't be needed, that we're fully stocked, because numbers are coming in where, because of what the American people are doing, we're having fewer hospital visits. I think that could be the case in New York. It could be the case in a few other states. And fewer beds, fewer hospital visits mean fewer ventilators. So we'll see.
Well, the president is partly correct. The rate of hospitalization in New York has gone down, or at least has not increased for 2 days in a row, but there are still over 130,000 cases of the coronavirus in New York.
HS have directly distributed 11.7 million N95 respirators. Think of that. Get the number. 11.7 million N95 respirators, 11.7 million, 26.5 million surgical masks, 5.3 million face shields, 4.4 million surgical gowns, and
the president is highlighting 11 million masks as a large number, but bear in mind that New York City alone has said that it needs 3.3 million, so that is just one city. And in fact, the Department of Health and Human Services has estimated that if this pandemic extends for an entire year, the U.S. will require 3.5 billion masks.
United States from overseas, we had an additional 3. These are massive planes, by the way. The big planes are very big, very powerful, and they're loaded to the gills with supplies. And rather than bringing them into our stockpile, as we've discussed, we bring them to all the different locations where they're needed, so we can save a big step and a timely step. Because of my actions under the DPA, I can also announce today that we have reached an agreement, very amicable agreement, with 3M for the delivery of an additional 55.5 million high-quality face masks each month, so that we're going to be getting, over the next couple of months, 166.5 million masks for our frontline healthcare workers. So the 3M saga ends very happily. We're very proud to be dealing now with 3M and its CEO, Mike Roman. I just spoke with him and I thanked him for.
Now, the president is highlighting how he has used the Defense Production Act to get this one company to produce masks. But let's remember, as Governor Cuomo has pointed out, every apparel company in the country could be producing masks and gowns and other personal protective equipment. And the president has the power and has not chosen to use the power of the Defense Production Act to marshal the full manufacturing power of the United States to that end.
And these are the shields that you see on television quite a bit, and they're at the highest level of quality and safety. We're grateful as well to Salesforce, which has donated 48 million pieces of personal protective equipment, including masks, gowns, suits, and face shields. So thank you very much to Salesforce. I urge all of our nation's governors to ensure that the massive deliveries that we've made to your states over the past few weeks are distributed as quickly as possible. So again, we're working very well with the governors. Now, they may see you and say, oh, we're not happy, but they're very happy on the phone. And Mike Pence is a straight shooter, and he had a great phone conversation to them with all of the governors, teleconference. And they're very happy, every one of them. Were there any negatives?
No, sir.
See? I told you.
Well, the president is saying that none of the governors have any complaints. Well, the fact of the matter is that New York says that it needs 40,000 ventilators, and it only got 4,400 from the federal government. It says that it has had more success in securing ventilators from China and from Oregon. Louisiana has requested 14,000 ventilators and has only gotten a few hundred. And Illinois has requested 4,000 ventilators. The last numbers I have, it has only gotten 450. New Jersey requested 2,500 and got 850. Virginia requested 350 and didn't get any. Furthermore, the New York Times reports that thousands of the ventilators that have been sent out by the federal government have turned out to be broken.
Take place. Resources from the national stockpile need to reach our warriors. And they are warriors. I tell it all the time. I saw it again this morning. These young, in many cases older, but they're walking into the hospital and they're putting on, I mean, as their doors open, they're going into this place. And, you know, it's not exactly too safe.
The president is rightly referring to doctors and nurses and medics as warriors and heroes. It is important to remember that several times last week he suggested that they were thieves and repeatedly insinuated that the reason that New York was short of medical supplies was that they were, quote, going out the back door.
In there, they're not thinking about, oh, gee, this is dangerous. They're not saying, oh, I don't want to go in. They're warriors. They're running through those doors. It's the most incredible thing. It's an incredible, beautiful thing. Resources from the national stockpile need to reach these warriors in the hospitals immediately, and we're making sure they do. And again, the states have that responsibility, but we're working with the states, and we're getting the states a lot of things that they can distribute, or when they tell us, we bring it directly to the hospital from the federal stockpile or from the planes that land, without even going to the stockpile. If any state's having difficulty distributing supplies, we urge you to use the National Guard to assist in the delivery. And I have to say, you have done a fantastic job. Deborah, you know that you've done great. Tony, you know that you've done great, but what a job you've done, and I appreciate it. I really do. Your whole group has been incredible. That's a lot of stars you have, I'll tell you that. He's supposed to do a great job when you have 4 stars, right? But the military has been incredible, and I thank them for all of us. Conversely, if a state believes that it has surplus equipment or supplies, very important, because we actually have gotten so much to some of the states that they're able to now, they've done a fantastic job, and they've kept that line low. And we have some states that have surplus equipment and supplies, and they're working with us to rapidly redeploy those supplies to areas of greatest need. We thought that might happen. If it worked out well, that's what was going to happen, and it's happening. And
I want to just take a moment to circle back to something President Trump said about Salesforce. Something that we have been seeing in these briefings is that the president has often used them to celebrate The companies with whom he has personal relationships, such as MyPillow. Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff had a front row seat at Ivanka Trump's keynote speech at the Consumer Electronics Show, and they had met before as well, and so I just want to keep those family connections in mind as President Trump is giving shout-outs to these companies.
Administrators across our country, and we're told that at the present time, most of the critical needs are being more than met. States have to continue sharing detailed information in the amount and utilization rates of medical supplies.
All right, the president is saying that all of states' needs are being met. Multiple states, as I have just mentioned, have complained that they have a shortage of gear. New York, although it is doing all right at the moment, is at risk of running out of gear within the next week. The governor of Louisiana said that he is at risk of running out of the materials that he needs within the next few days as well, and other governors of states have flagged similar concerns.
I got some information as to a couple of locations where we're going to be delivering large numbers of ventilators and large numbers of medical supplies, and we'll take care of that. But some of the states are very happy. Even Governor Pritzker from Illinois is happy. Of course, he may not be happy when he talks to the press, but he's happy. He's a very happy man. We're increasingly hopeful that the aggressive mitigation strategy we put into place will ultimately allow our hospital system to successfully manage the major influx of cases that we have right now. Again, I say that we're finding, because of the incredible job done by the American people in conjunction with everybody.
President Trump just said that Governor Pritzker of Illinois is very happy. President Trump in the past few days has taken it upon himself to insult Governor Pritzker. But it's very clear from the governor's statement to CNN yesterday that he is not happy. He said, quote, "The president does not understand the word federal in federal emergency management. We have a state emergency management agency, but if he were right, why would we ever need a federal emergency management agency?" And he also went on to complain that the president has failed to enact the Defense Production Act, and has defended the fact that, of course, Illinois could not create a massive stockpile, and that the federal government has been failing the state. He said if they had started in February building ventilators, getting ready for this pandemic, and as we noted when we reviewed the timeline earlier, the federal government was well aware of this problem in February. Pritzker said if they had started in February, we would not have the problems that we have today, and very frankly, very many fewer people would die.
I also spoke just a few minutes ago with former Vice President Biden, who called, and we had a really wonderful, warm conversation. It was a very nice conversation. We talked about pretty much this. This is what we talked about. This is what everyone's talking about. This is what they want to talk about. And he gave me his point of view, and I fully understood that. And we just had a very friendly conversation. Lasted probably 15 minutes. And it was really good. It was really good.
Earlier today, President Trump was attacking Joe Biden on Twitter, suggesting that Joe Biden's reasons for wishing to delay the convention were out of personal fear, and suggesting that the news that Biden wanted to speak to him on the phone about the emergency was fake. Apparently it was not fake, as we now know that they did indeed talk today.
And currently 10 different therapeutic agents are in active trials, and some are looking incredibly successful, but we have to go through a process. And it's going to be a fairly quick process, I will tell you, based on what the FDA told me. And another 15 are in plans for clinical trials. So they're advancing rapidly. And today, a second company announced that the FDA has authorized its vaccine candidate to begin clinical trials. So you have Johnson & Johnson is already there. I believe they're the one that's first. And now we have a second company that just announced, and we were just was just approved. So we have two companies at that level for the vaccine itself.
Now, the first vaccine that he mentioned, the one that's being worked on by Johnson & Johnson, according to the information I have, that is in the second phase of trial, which is good news, but it does mean that it is still at least a year away.
But just don't care. And here it is. This is the process starting on 5 March and ending right there, right about now, right? That's about it. So, and it's going up at a rapid rate.
The president is highlighting the tests that have been completed. He specifically said that this widespread testing began on March 5th. Bear in mind that the first case of the coronavirus was diagnosed in the U.S. on on January 21st, and we now know that the president was warned about this, or at least that the National Security Council was, by at least January 3rd. So March 5th is a remarkably later period of time to begin testing. The president says that we are doing more tests than any other country, but the fact of the matter is that when factored in per capita, we rank 41st in the world for testing.
125,000 people per day. Think of that one. So it's growing by 125,000 people per day. I told you about South Korea. This is a, vastly faster. And we also have...
The president is misrepresenting his record. He's saying that testing 125,000 people per day is faster than South Korea. In February, South Korea was testing more people per capita than that. South Korea's population is smaller than the U.S., but they were testing more people per capita in February than the president is celebrating that we are testing today.
And families and the employers. As of today, tens of thousands of small businesses have applied for more than $40 billion in relief under the Paycheck Protection Program. You've all been reading about it, and it's really, it's only been going for a couple of days. It's really been performing well. A couple of little glitches, minor glitches that have already been taken care of, what they say.
Some of these glitches are, in fact, more significant. What has happened is that many of the banks have been completely overwhelmed by the demand and have been unable to even start taking applications.
Signing up additional lenders very quickly, rapidly. Community banks have been very responsive, and larger banks are also stepping up. If we run out of funds, by the way, we're already preparing because it's going so fast for the small businesses and their employees. We'll ask Congress to refill it immediately. But the banks have been great. The big banks, the Bank of America was right up there at the beginning. J.P. Morgan Chase has been great. After the first day, they really came through, and a lot of the big banks, but the community banks have been fantastic. As we announced last week, we are providing $100 billion in direct support for our hospitals. And the first tranche, $30 billion, will be distributed this week. So I want to say one other thing. Our farmers, we love our farmers. And as you know, as of April 1st, the China trade deal, $250 billion, they purchased $250 billion from us, if not more. And of that, approximately $50 billion is expected to be with our farmers. So it kicked in as of April 1st, and we'll see how it goes. It seems like they're buying, so we'll let you know how that's going. But they're buying anywhere from $40 to $50 billion worth of our agricultural product. That should have a huge impact on our farmers, a tremendous impact on our farmers, but we're watching it very closely.
By the way, the president has just mentioned J.P. Morgan Chase, the chief executive, Jamie Dimon, in a note to shareholders today, warned that he is anticipating a, quote, bad recession combined with some of the financial stress similar to the global financial crisis of 2008.
So many people are making donations. We've seen states and cities supporting and helping each other and caring for our citizens. And we've seen Americans of all backgrounds and beliefs uniting together to answer the challenge and rise to the moment. And that's what they're doing. Above all, we've been awed and inspired by the exceptional courage of the doctors, nurses, EMTs, and healthcare workers who are the soldiers of this war. No words can ever express the complete measure of our gratitude.
I want to point out that when President Trump is reading from his prepared notes, he uses language that is conciliatory and calls for unity and celebrates the medical professionals who are risking their lives. When he speaks from the heart, he is more likely to insult governors and medics and doctors and nurses.
Of that hospital where people were dying, and he talked about their bravery. Another survivor in Houston said simply, I will consider them my angels forever. I will consider them, think of that, my angels forever. As our nation endures the depths of loss and grief, we are also witness to the summit of American virtue, character, and courage. With the love and dedication of every American patriot, we will win this battle, we will defeat this enemy, and we will rise from this present crisis with new strength, unity, and resolve. And that's what's happening. Tremendous stories are coming out of this horrible moment, very dark moment for the world. 182. I was saying 151 for a while, and then it got up to 160, and it's 182, as I announced yesterday. 182 countries are being attacked by this virus.
It is actually 184 countries.
The American citizens are doing a great job. Stay inside and let's win this, and let's get our country open as soon as we can. I think it's going to be sooner than people think. Things are going really well. Again, light at the end of the tunnel. And with that, I'll take a few questions, and then Mike is going to take over and talk with the Admiral and with the professionals, and we appreciate you being here. Yes, please.
Mr. President, you mentioned that you were asking U.S. drug companies to provide treatment to the British Prime Minister. What sort of treatment is that? Is that something that is available?
Well, it's it's a very complex treatment of things that they've just recently developed, and that they have a lot of experience with, having to do with something else, but recent for this. And they've already concurred. They've already had meetings with the doctors, and we'll see whether or not they want to go that route. But when you're in intensive care, it's a big deal. So they're there and they're ready. I think we have three of them. I spoke with four. You know who the four would be, and you know the people within those. You'd know the companies. I told you the companies, but the people are the greatest in the world. So they're at the hospital, and we'll see. And they have everything with them should it be needed. Hopefully it won't have to be needed, but should it be needed. I found Boris to be a fantastic person, just like a fantastic, warm, strong, smart guy. He loves his country. You see that? I mean, he fought like hell for his country. And intensive care is big stuff, really big stuff.
Yesterday you were asked about this as well. But now that he's been moved to intensive care, does that give you and the Vice President any pause?
Now, what the President has just said about these mysterious treatments being provided to Boris Johnson by the U.S. is puzzling, because there is, at this point, no confirmed treatment. There is no cure. It is unclear what sort of aid that we could be offering to Boris Johnson that is not being made possible and available to Americans right here.
Sit again today. You sure you're okay?
I'm okay.
Good, then I'm staying here.
Despite the nearly 1.8 million tests that you say the United States has done, the Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services released a report today, a survey of more than 300 hospitals across the country, and the number one complaint from those hospitals were severe shortages of testing supplies and
Well,
a
it's
really
just
long
wrong.
wait time. I mean,
It's
a
just
week
wrong.
or longer.
And did I hear the word Inspector General? Really? It's wrong. And they'll talk to you about it. It's wrong.
But this is wrong.
The president is, with no evidence, is dismissing the report from the Inspector General of Health and Human Services, and also seems to be dismissing the very concept of having inspector generals.
These are hospitals.
All I can tell
that
you
do
is
not-
this. We
Sir,
put up on the
these
board,
hospitals-
you're going to ask the Admiral, but
These are
we are
hospitals
doing,
who say that they're waiting a week or longer
Fine.
to get
You'll
their
speak to
test
the Admiral.
results. Why
but
is
we've
it
done
still
more
taking so
testing
long?
and had more results than any country anywhere in the world. They're doing an incredible job. Now they're all calling us. They want our testing. What are we doing? How do you do the 5-minute test? How do you do the...
It is simply not true that we have been succeeding in testing. As the president just pointed out, widespread testing did not begin until March 5th. Also, that reporter is absolutely correct. The Health and Human Services Inspector General released a report today that confirms that hospitals are facing severe and widespread shortages of personal protective equipment, ventilators, testing supplies, and staff.
Today, we had a very good talk, and we'll see whether or not that's it. I would be surprised if he would, because India does very well with the United States. For many years, they've been taking advantage of the United States on trade. So I would be surprised if that were his decision. He'd have to tell me that. I spoke to him Sunday morning, called him, and I said, we'd appreciate your allowing our supply to come out. If he doesn't allow it to come out, that would be okay. But, of course, there may be retaliation. Why wouldn't there be? Yeah, please.
Also, I want to say, since the president was gushing about his warm feelings for what a wonderful person Boris Johnson is, it is worth noting that Boris Johnson, while we all pray for his recovery, has a history of really ferocious, homophobic, Islamophobic, and misogynistic statements. I'd actually asked a member of our team to pull some for me to share, and I don't feel comfortable reading a single one of them aloud, and these are words that were said by the Prime Minister of the UK.
So much nicer if you do that, but you're just incapable of asking a question
So what
in a
oversight
positive
measures
way.
is the federal government
It's
putting
already
in
done.
place
It's already
to
done.
ensure that there
It's
The
take,
president is telling a woman reporter of color that she's incapable of asking a question. President Trump has a history of attacking women of color in his briefings.
business is working. But it's such a positive event, and you ask it in such a negative way. It just, I wish we had a fair media in this country, and we really don't. Speaking of unfair, go ahead.
Mr. President, the acting Secretary of the Navy told the crew of the USS Roosevelt that Captain Crozier was either, quote, too naive or too stupid to be in command. Is it appropriate for the Chief Officer of the Navy to speak in this way about this captain? Is this
Well, I
the
haven't
right
heard
way-
it exactly. I haven't heard. I heard they had a statement that was made. If that were the statement, it's a strong statement. Look, the letters shouldn't have been sent, and certainly they shouldn't have been leaked. This is a military operation. I must tell you,
The president is referring to Captain Brett Crozier, who wrote a letter flagging that he was concerned that he was not being able to protect his crew of the Theodore Roosevelt from the coronavirus. He said, if we do not act now, we are failing to properly take care of our most trusted asset, our sailors. After calling attention to the outbreak of coronavirus on his ship, he was relieved of duty. He has since tested positive for the coronavirus himself, and President Trump is just now attacking him for sounding an alarm that there was the virus aboard his ship.
It was
letters should not have been sent to many people, unclassified. That was a mistake. It's a mistake that shouldn't have been made, because it's unfair to the families of the people on the ship because they get nervous, and it shows weakness. And there's nothing weak about us now, not anymore. We have the strongest military we've ever had, and we're not going to be showing weakness to anybody, because we have, that ship is incredible, nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, and we don't want to be writing letters. We don't want to have letter-writing campaigns where the fake news finds a letter or gets a leak. We don't want that. So the letter, excuse me, so the letter shouldn't have been sent. With all of that said, his career prior to that was very good. So I'm going to get involved and see exactly what's going on there. Because
the president is boasting about the strength of our military while at the same time attacking a member of the military for calling attention to the fact that the military is not adequately protecting its service members. To date, at least 35 service members have become infected with the coronavirus, and at least one has died.
I enjoyed it. I hope he enjoyed it too. And it was short. It was 15 minutes.
Did he have good suggestions? Anything that you're going to do?
Well, he had suggestions. It doesn't mean that I agree with those suggestions, but certainly he had suggestions. And I also told him some of the things we're doing. But the conversation was a friendly, very friendly conversation. Yeah, please.
Thanks a lot, Mr. President. You've mentioned, other members of your task force have mentioned, over the course of the next 2 weeks, it's going to be a very difficult time for our country in terms of fatalities. And
It will be a difficult week and a half.
And there are a number of governors who are close allies of yours, Mr. President, who have refrained thus far to have these stay-at-home orders. And Dr. Fauci, who of course is on your task force, has said that the states that don't have stay-at-home orders are putting themselves at risk and the country at
Well,
risk.
if Dr. Fauci said that, I would be inclined to call them up. You know, we do have a constitutional problem in doing that. You understand that. I mean, there's a double-edged sword. You understand. I can do it, but it is a constitutional. You can say federalist. You can say there's lots of different reasons.
The president is fully empowered to issue a stay-at-home order across the nation for during this national emergency. He has not been shy about declaring national emergencies in the past. He has used emergency powers to try to fund the wall. The fact of the matter is that there are a number, 8 or 9 states that still do not have stay-at-home orders. Because the president has politicized this issue, Republican governors have been reluctant to issue stay-at-home orders. And at least 4 of the states that do not have stay-at-home orders in place have infection rates of over 1,000.
And they really are doing a very good job, both of them. Those are the only 2 that I spoke to, but it was a really good conversation, and I want to make sure people understand that just because they don't have a very strict stay-at-home order, they have in place a lot of things that are totally compatible with what everyone else is doing.
If I can ask a question, Dr. Fauci, before you...
Go ahead.
About getting back to normal, you said you wanted to get back to normal as soon as possible. Will we truly get back to normal in this country before there's an actual vaccine that's available to everybody? How do you start lifting the restrictions?
Yeah, well, John, if back to normal means acting like there never was a coronavirus problem, I don't think that's going to happen until we do have a situation where you can completely protect the population. But when we say getting back to normal, we mean something very different from what we're going through right now. Because right now we are in a very intense mitigation. When we get back to normal, we will go back gradually to the point where we can function as a society. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if you want to get to pre-coronavirus, you know, that might not ever happen in the sense of the therapies that will be coming online, and with the fact that I feel confident that over a period of time we will get a good vaccine, that we will never have to get back to where we are right back now. So if that means getting back to normal, then we'll get back to normal.
I think that with the therapies, and I think that with the vaccines, which I have total confidence are coming, and I'm dealing with the companies. I'm talking to Johnson & Johnson. I'm talking to all of them. I think that when you add the tremendous stimulus that we're giving, like, for instance, deductibility for restaurant expenses for restaurants and entertainment.
This is a new obsession of the president's, this restaurant deductibility. It is something that his tax law actually eliminated. There is no evidence that making business meals tax deductible again would bring a massive resurgence to the economy. There is no economic evidence to suggest that. And it's also, he's saying it like it's a thing that's been done. It's not part of any bill that is currently being put forward by anyone in either chamber of Congress.
It does. You look at most places where that You can call it the bump, you can call it the hill, you can call it the mountain, you can call it whatever you want to do it. It's very flat. You take a look, and that was done through mitigation. That was done through a lot of good work. And that far exceeded our expectations before. I mean, people can't even believe how low some of those bumps are, some of those hills are. They're very surprised. Now, you have a couple of tough ones. New Jersey's been very tough, and New York has been very tough. They're crowded in, it's tight, it's tougher. But far exceeding, California far exceeds, Washington State far exceeds. You look at so many of these states, how well they're doing. The 8 states, by the way, and I haven't spoken to the...
President Trump is praising Washington's response. He has previously attacked the governor of Washington, who is responsible for that response, calling him a snake.
And they're doing a fantastic job. Take a look at where they are in terms of the levels, but take a look where they are. So, but if I thought it was something that, and I've looked at him very carefully, looked at him today, looked at him yesterday, from a constitutional standpoint, I'd love not to get involved with that. And not from a legal standpoint, just from a moral constitutional standpoint. Because legally I can. But morally, I believe in our Constitution much more so than most people. And I'd love to be able to let the governors do what they have to do. Those states are doing a fantastic job, all 8 of them. They're doing a fantastic job. So we'll see what happens. As for your question, you fully understand what I'm saying, so thank you.
The states that President Trump is praising for doing a good job, even though they don't have stay-at-home orders in place, as I mentioned, many of them have surging levels of cases that are not being adequately contained. South Carolina in particular now has more than 2,000 cases.
It out. There were many people thinking about writing it out, meaning, whatever it is. But then you see what starts to happen, and the numbers become monumental, and they decide not to do that. We actually moved early. We moved early because of what we did with respect to the ban on China coming in, and then Europe coming in. That was an early ban too, and then UK. So
the restrictions on Chinese travel were not early. They had been debated since January and did not go into effect until the beginning of February. And as I highlighted before this briefing began, in the period of time when they were debating whether within the administration, whether they would put something like that into effect, more than 300,000 people had come into the U.S. from China over that previous month. And as a result, this is truly a case of, to use the folksy expression, closing the door after the horse has left the barn. Or I guess after the horse has come into the barn and ripped it up in this case.
As is not known, will the CDC be publishing that data?
yeah, I could get you that information. I think they'd probably be willing to give that, right? Yeah, we could get you that information. Jeff, please.
Mr. President, OPEC is meeting on Thursday, and
Yeah.
they have said that they are willing to make a cut in production if the U.S. chips in as well, which suggests that they want you to ask U.S. producers to do an
Well, you're the first
orchestrated
one that's
cut.
told me that. I don't know. We'll have to make that decision. And maybe we will, maybe we won't, but we'll have to make that decision.
But you would-
I think the cuts are automatic. If you're a believer in markets, I can guarantee you there's a cut from pre this condition. Look, this happened because of the virus. The virus knocked out 40%. It went down in 1 hour. I mean, literally, when places closed up, you're talking about a 40% cut. No, I think it's happening automatically, but nobody's asked me that question yet, so we'll see what happens.
But you would
I'll let you know Thursday evening.
All right, that's the deal. But,
Okay.
but you would consider asking U.S. companies to
Well, I think it's
reduce...
automatic, because they're already cutting. I mean, if you look, they're cutting back, because
OPEC is asking
it's market,
for
it's demand, it's supply and demand. They're already cutting back, and they're cutting back very seriously.
But if OPEC is asking for a signal from
Well,
the
nobody's
U.S.
asked me that, so if they ask me, I'll make a decision. Okay? But again, it's happening anyway. Yes, please.
In light of all the discussion about Prime Minister Johnson and his health, can you update us on the status of the second half of your physical that you were going to have this year?
Yeah, so I had a physical. The first half was very successful. I did it on a day when I was in the White House, and we were able to do that, as the doctor reported. and I have some, the second half of the physical different. Probably is done at Walter Reed, and I'll do that at the appropriate time, but I feel very good, and according to the doctor, very good shape.
Can I just ask you again on the idea of a national stay-at-home recommendation? What is giving you so much pause about making a recommendation?
I told you. He understood very well. I appreciate your understanding.
It's not an
It's
order,
called
just a
the Constitution of the
recommendation.
United States, and I'd rather have, if possible, for the governors to make the decision. If a decision was very necessary, and they have done a good job, and Tony said it better than anybody, they are doing what we're asking them to do without having to put the seal on it. But I will say, if I thought it was necessary, I'll do it in a heartbeat.
Do you agree with the Georgia governor opening the beaches?
Opening what?
The beaches?
I haven't seen, I'm going to have to see to what extent. I'm going to have to see how many people you're talking about. Are they crowded? Are they packed? Are they not packed? We'll have to take a look at it. Right now, it's very early for beaches in Georgia. So right now, very early, so I'll take a look at it. He's done a very good job as the governor. He knows what he's doing, but we'll have to take a look. It really does depend on, how crowded it may be, but I will.
Now, the president is saying that if there were a medical need, he would issue a stay-at-home order nationwide. He suggested sometimes within this same press conference, he said that the Constitution doesn't allow him to, but actually it does. He has a moral objection to it. Dr. Fauci suggested last week that the federal government needs to mandate a nationwide stay-at-home order to help prevent the spread of this disease, and that an increasing number of scientists are pushing for that nationwide lockdown. And numerous governors have said that as long as some states do not implement restrictive guidelines, the whole country's health comes down to the lowest common denominator. I saw a rather earthy tweet about this, saying that it essentially is like having in a public swimming pool, having a peeing section and a non-peeing section. As long as there are not restrictions in place anywhere, everyone is subjected to the health risks that come about from it.
It wasn't so much her opinion, but they interviewed 323 different hospitals.
Well, it still could be her opinion. When was she appointed?
I'm not sure when she was
Would you do
appointed.
me a favor? Let me know.
I'll check.
No,
on
let me
that.
know now. I have to know now, John. Let me know now.
But the point
Because
is-
we are doing an incredible job in testing. We are doing a better job than anybody in the world right now in testing.
This is false when the president says that we are doing a better job than any country in the world in testing. Again, per capita, we are 41st in the world for testing.
Would you?
Specifically,
Go ahead,
what she
please.
was saying was that there had been a delay in the
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Only last week, there were multiple flights coming from China full of medical supplies.
Yes.
Companies like Huawei and Alibaba has been donating to
Right.
the United States
People I know very well.
1.5 million N95 masks, and also a lot of medical gloves and much more medical supplies.
Sounds like a statement more than a question.
And Chinese Ambassador Cui Tiankai last night wrote an op-ed on New York Times calling to cooperation with the United States. So are you personally working directly with China?
We just signed a trade deal.
So fighting with the
It's the
virus?
biggest deal probably ever made, and I hope they're going to honor that trade deal. If they don't honor the trade deal, then I'll tell you a different answer, but I think they will. They're going to spend billions of dollars for agriculture. They're going to spend billions of dollars for many different things, whereas
Well,
China
medical
never spent
supplies.
money in our country. We spent money. We had a trade deficit with China for years of $500 billion, $400 billion. We had the biggest trade deficits in the history of the world with China. Now China's going to spend a lot, has agreed to spend $250 billion, many billions of dollars in our country, much of it going to farmers and manufacturers. So I'll let you know. I mean, I hope they're going to honor the deal. We'll find
with
out.
China, are you cooperating with
I don't
China?
know. Who are you working for, China? You work for
I'm
China, or are
working
you with a
for Hong
newspaper?
Kong.
Who are you with?
Hong Kong Phoenix TV.
Who owns that, China?
It's
Is it owned by
based in
China?
Hong Kong.
No, is it owned by the state?
No, it's not. It's a private-owned company.
Okay, good. Okay. Look, I'll let you know. I'll give you a good answer to that in a few months. I wanted to see what they do.
Notice that when President Trump is speaking to women journalists of color, this question, where are you from, keeps coming up. He tends to call into question the legitimacy of women journalists of color who question him.
Our farmers benefited, our manufacturers benefited, and we'll see whether or not that deal is honored. And I think it will be, because I know President Xi, who I like and respect, and I think he will honor the deal he made with us. It just went into effect 4 days ago. I will see whether or not. In fact, I called up just a little while ago. I said, how are the farmers doing with respect to China? Are they buying the product as anticipated? And the answer was, yeah, I think so. But it wasn't the most positive, but it was starting. The deal just started. So I'll let you know. But, for many, many years, China ate our lunch because we had people in this position that I'm in right now that allowed China to get away with absolute murder. And it should have never happened. But we are now dealing with China. We'll see what happens. Yeah,
Mr. President,
It is interesting that President Trump is saying that previous administrations allowed China to get away with murder when he has just been talking about his phone calls with Saudi Arabia. President Trump, according to CIA analysts, has been literally allowing Saudi Arabia to get away with murder, because the CIA has confirmed that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia ordered the killing of a Washington Post journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, a father of four who lived in Virginia. And even though President Trump has been presented with an audio recording of this, of Khashoggi being murdered, tortured, and dismembered, he has refused to listen to it and has refused to accept the analysis of his own CIA. So just something to bear in mind in terms of what presidents are literally letting countries get away with murder.
Government, listen to me. We're the federal government. We're not supposed to stand on street corners doing testing. They go to doctors. They go to hospitals. They go to the state. The state is a more localized government. You have 50 of them, and they can go 50 within here. You also have territories, as you know, and they do the testing. And if you look at the chart, if you take a look, did they put it up? Yeah, just take a look. And these are testing, and the results are now coming in very quickly. Initially speaking, the tests were old, obsolete, and not really prepared. We have a brand...
So the president's saying a lot of false things here. There's a phrase that he likes to use. He likes to say that the previous administration left him with faulty tests. The COVID-19 is a new virus. Tests left behind by the previous administration. Tests did not exist at that time. A new virus requires new tests. The Germany, in January, before there were any cases of the coronavirus there, began creating tests. The World Health Organization began distributing those tests to the whole world. The U.S. said, no thank you, we'll make our own. Now President Trump is suggesting that it is in some way preposterous that these tests would be administered on the federal level. I'd mentioned earlier that the previous administration, while it was not possible to leave behind tests for a new disease, it was possible to leave behind a pandemic playbook. And one of the things in the pandemic playbook is that you need widespread national testing, the sort of widespread nationwide effort that could only be orchestrated at a federal level. If you compare countries that have successfully contained this disease, like South Korea, to countries like the United States, which have, by any metric, failed to contain the disease, the widespread, centrally organized testing is the most powerful factor and the biggest difference in response.
Do now, like they do now, and I'm on the phone with them all the time to make sure that everything is clear. We have a 24-hour call number. But that's what it was there for. And I don't know the Inspector General. I don't know that person. I tell you one thing I have a problem with. If there was such a problem that she knew about or he knew about on March 23rd and 24th, why did I find out about the tests from them
He's the one in charge.
on the news media at 8 o'clock this morning. If there was a problem, I think you're ethically obliged to tell me where that is so we can interact with it like I do every single day. But that's a discussion for the future. I think testing is really in a good position right now, and I'd be happy to expand on some of the really good tests that are coming up.
How long has that person been in government?
Did serve in the previous administration.
Oh, you didn't tell me that. Oh, I see.
Now, the president is suggesting, again, that anyone who has served in the previous administration is illegitimate.
It's a typical fake news deal.
You asked me when she was appointed. I told you when she was appointed.
You're a
by your
third-rate
administration.
reporter.
The President of the United States, who earlier was calling for unity, is now attacking reporters and making ridiculous faces.
I said, when did this person, how long in government? Well, it was appointed in the Obama administration. Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much. You will never make it. Go ahead, please.
The President is simply enraged that Barack Obama was president at one time and is continually suggesting that anything done by the previous administration or anyone appointed by the previous administration is illegitimate.
And down to the hospital level. So we have been able to meet and easily meet all the ventilator requirements that have been brought to us by the state.
And it is now clearer why the President of the United States would have fired the Global Health Security Unit that President Obama had established, and why he would have discarded the pandemic playbook and instead chosen to reinvent the wheel from scratch in this crisis.
I think is not a number that we give out, but we have thousands remaining in the stockpile. And now you're seeing out of the appropriate American spirit that when a state like Washington or California doesn't need that ventilator, they're doing the right thing by moving them around the country.
It's about 9,000, just so you understand. That's right. It's about 9,000. And by the way, you didn't tell me also that this Inspector General came out of the Obama administration. You didn't tell me that. Okay, please, go ahead.
So now the President is just waving his hands at journalists now. And again, they've made the claim that there is a large number of ventilators, that there are more ventilators than are needed. But as has been said repeatedly, there are only around 9,000 ventilators in the federal stockpile. A U.S. Conference of Mayors survey has estimated that there will be as many as 140,000 needed. There was the ability in the past to have acquired those ventilators by the federal government. The Pentagon had warned in 2017 of a shortage of ventilators, but those concerns were dismissed.
Remember, a very important general said, sir, we have no ammunition. They wanted to save money on ammunition. They didn't want to save money because they spent money like nobody ever spent money. But you know what?
The president is also repeating a false story of a general telling him, sir, we have no ammunition. Bear in mind, when the president tells stories that involve someone calling him sir, more often than not, they are false stories. This is also a false story that has been repeatedly fact-checked and debunked, given multiple Pinocchios and Pants on Fire's ratings by the various fact-checking outlets.
A certain person, I won't tell you, but a certain person said this will happen. And that's true. The problem is that person never did anything about it. Previous administrations, they never did anything about it. You know, we all know all about pandemics and all of the things that we're seeing now, but nobody thought it was going to happen.
What the president is saying is false. People did think that it was going to happen, and when he says that the previous administration didn't do anything about it, that is false. The previous administration created the Global Health Security Unit within the National Security Team. President Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, says that she personally gave the pandemic playbook to Trump's National Security Team. They did not implement it. It is simply false to say that people in the previous administration did not anticipate the risk of a global pandemic.
Really have been very nice and generous in their statements because they make the statements to the press, not just to my face. Others tell us how great we're doing. like the call that Mike had today. I heard from other people that were on the call. He said it was incredible. It was 2 hours, and everything was positive. They were so happy with what we've done. And we're ready to do more if they need it, because we're ready to march. The Admiral can tell you, we are sitting there with 9,000 ventilators, and we're ready to march when we see that we can move very quickly. As soon
He's got 9,000 ventilators that he admits he is withholding from New York, which state says that it is on the brink of running out of ventilators, and 9,000 is far fewer than the estimated 140,000 nationwide needed to face this crisis. The president has ordered ventilators to be built, but he has made that order too late.
FEMA, we have this whole force that like nobody's ever seen before. We have a great military operation, and they've done an incredible job. And honestly, people should respect, because nobody's ever seen anything like what we've done. And what they end up with, forget about me, don't worry about me. I will only get bad. If I say, how many ventilators do you need, Governor? 1,000 would be great. I said, nope, I'm going to send you 10,000. And then you'll call up from the media. You'll say, how did Trump do? We're not happy he didn't send us enough ventilators. Because that's called politics.
President Trump, with no evidence, is claiming that governors are artificially inflating the number of ventilators that they say that they need to politically smear him. I would like to remind you that in New York to date, in the state of New York, there have been over 4,700 deaths, and the President of the United States is suggesting that Governor Cuomo, rather than focusing on the 130,000 cases of this disease in the state or the 4,700 deaths, is making calculated political smears and lying about the number of ventilators that he needs in order to make the president look bad. This is a shocking allegation that the president is making with no evidence to support it.
I think that hurts
It's
Texas.
not used yet.
We're only helping Texas. By the way, the governor's doing a great job over there with this situation. And Texas is so big, you have some parts of the state that are affected, other parts that aren't affected at all. You know, it's an incredible place.
But do they keep this hospital?
This idea that some parts of a state are impacted and others aren't, the nature of this disease, the way it spreads through the movement of people, unless there is an effort to curtail the movement of people, there is no area that is not going to be affected.
To check people coming in from Louisiana. We've seen checkpoints in Florida, other state borders. Americans are not
Very
really-
few people are coming through our border, and you'll be happy to know we're up to mile 161 of the wall.
Internal borders between.
This claim about building the wall is false. There has been some replacing of existing old fencing with new fencing, but as of a report from the Customs and Border Patrol earlier this year, only 1 new mile of wall had been built.
To do something. And then you're complaining that another governor is so strict that he actually checks the borders. I understand why he's doing that, because he knows who he has, and he doesn't want people coming in if they should maybe, not be to the liking of the doctors. No, I think look, he's done a great job. He's done a great job with this case, as have many other governors, but he's done a great job. One of the things I thought you were going to say is we've been very tough on our southern border, as you know, very, very tough. And part of that's because of the fact that we have so much, when you talk about 160 miles of new wall, nobody's coming through that. Nobody, not even.
There is not 160 miles of new wall. A moment ago, he said it was 150 something. There is roughly 1 mile of new wall, and a wall cannot protect us from the coronavirus because the U.S. has over 350,000 cases, whereas Mexico only has about 2,000 cases. If anyone needs a wall for protection, it is for Mexico to protect itself against us. In fact, we may finally have reached a scenario where it makes sense for Mexico to pay for the wall.
But and frankly, for so many years, we've let our infrastructure go to hell because we were wasting all our money in the Middle East and other places, okay? I want to rebuild our country. I don't want to rebuild. We're tired. We've rebuilt, if you call it that. We're destroyed, frankly. What we've done is so crazy. What we have done, the direction that this country has taken is so sad. But we're in the Middle East for $8 trillion. And if you want to fix a pothole in a highway, you can't do it because they don't want to give you the funds. So we want to have an infrastructure bill, a real one, like...
Now, the president is attacking the decision of President Bush to invade Iraq when he is complaining about the money spent in the Middle East. Whatever your feelings may be about whether it was right or wrong to go in, one thing that's important to bear in mind is that although President Trump now claims that he always opposed it, he was in fact in favor of invading Iraq at the time.
Economy in the history of the world. We had the most people working in the history of our country, almost 160 million people, far more than ever before. And then one day our professionals correctly came to us and they said, sorry, sir, we have to close down our country. And I said, say it again. Say it again. We have to close down our country. And the entire world closed down because of this hidden enemy. No, we're going to take good care of our people. It was not their fault.
Dr. Birx to clarify something that she said on Saturday, sir.
Yes, please.
May I ask Dr. Birx to clarify something that she said on Saturday? If I may, Dr. Birx, this is a question that comes from a radio colleague of mine, Tamara Keith. And on Saturday, it sounded like you said that for the next week, people in high-risk areas should not even go to the market or the drugstore. Is that what you meant to say, or is that accurate?
You know, out of respect for every single healthcare worker that's on the front line, whether they're a nurse, a doctor, a respiratory therapist, the phlebotomist, the persons who come in the rooms to clean, you know, out of respect for them, we as Americans should be doing everything possible. And what I meant was, if you can consolidate, if you can send one person, the entire family doesn't need to go out on these occasions. We really need, this is a highly transmittable virus. We've been saying that we want every American to know that what they're doing is making a difference, but we need to have solidarity of commitment from everyone to really, so, you know, maybe once every 2 weeks we can do a grocery store and pharmacy shop for the entire family. So it was really about, we have to do everything we can. I know I see on the TV stations the level of human suffering in the hospitals. Dr. Fauci and I and Admiral Giroir have spent our lives taking care of others. We need to take care of each other now as Americans and do everything that's in those guidelines. And I know they're tough. I know incredibly how tough they are. My grandchild of 10 months got a fever of 105 this weekend. I'm the doctor, and I couldn't get there. I mean, so I'm trying to explain to my daughter how to listen to her lungs, how to listen to her lungs, and then the baby's lungs.
You did not get there?
I did not go there.
Good, I'm very happy with that.
Because of you two. I mean, when you can't take that kind of risk with the leaders of the country.
Your grandson's okay?
So, daughter, but she's coming out of
temperature.
Yes. But, you know, we're all, and that's just an illustration that I know you all are making sacrifices, and I guess I want everyone to take this seriously. So that was really a call of seriousness of how important this is and how we're starting to see the impact, but you can see what can happen when you come at this a little bit too late. And that's why the message, before you see it, before you have to see your hospitals and your emergency rooms overwhelmed, it is on us as a member of this community, of this country, to do everything possible to save one another. And so that was really what I was saying, and I will continue to say that, because I do believe it's making a difference. You can start to see it making a difference, but we have to do even more right now, because that will predict where we are 2 or 3 weeks from now.
Thank you, Deborah. And it is making a big difference. I saw where Governor Cuomo was a little bit upset today over the weekend. A lot of people outside, and they were pretty big groups of people. I saw that. I noticed that, and he wasn't happy with that. And I could understand that. Look, we have a short period of time. Hopefully it's a short period of time to go. And let's get it done. Let's get it done. Kristen, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank
You're
you.
so
Quick
quiet.
follow to, just got here,
Because you
apologies.
have your own show.
No. Quick follow to the question about legislation. I know there's discussion about a phase 4,
Yeah.
but are you also looking seriously at a second round of direct payments? And are you putting discussions on a potential phase 4 on hold for now while you pursue that?
Well, I was opposed to the way of distribution, money distribution through, as you know, unemployment and through the state offices, because they have very old, not all of them, but many of them have 40-year-old equipment, as I've said, and it makes it very difficult. But that's what that's what they want to do. That's the way it's mandated to do. I thought it would be better if we did a direct payment system, but the Democrats really wanted it, and I think
The president seems to be confused about what is in the bill and how it works. The direct payments of $1,200 to most Americans are coming from the IRS. They are coming from the federal government. There is also in the bill an increased unemployment benefit, and that's being paid through the state unemployment agencies because that is how unemployment has always been run. And President Trump is oddly suggesting that it would have been easier for the federal government to take over running unemployment, which would effectively be creating a massive new federal program that has not been done before. The president is oddly suggesting that that would have been easier and that Democrats were responsible for it not being done that way, which is false.
he's just doing that because it's politics. Because you know what?
Person right now, Mr.
We have many, depending on what. In terms of testing, this gentleman right here. You know who the point person is? This gentleman right here. He's the one in charge of the task force. But Mike, you may want to tell him about them, because this is really a military operation.
Mr. Vice President, in terms of the supply chain.
Let me answer your first question, if I may, because it's a very good question, and I spoke to Senator Schumer night before last about just that. When the president signed a declaration of national emergency, he stood up FEMA as the lead agency implementing his policy to marshal a whole of government response.
Remember that this national emergency was not declared until March 13th, roughly 2.5 months after the administration had been alerted to this danger and after multiple states had already declared emergencies.
Administrator Pete Gaynor. But the man managing all of the supplies, and you heard a presentation this weekend about our air bridge, what we also call the control tower. We literally, with Admiral John Polovchik at the helm of our logistics effort, we have visibility now on all the supplies that are moving across this country and into this country from around the world. It really is extraordinary. I mean, when the president tapped FEMA to lead this effort, we essentially wanted to say, we want to organize this in a military fashion. And we tapped really someone who is widely regarded as the #1 supplies and logistics military officer to do just that.
He's referring to Polovchik, who was appointed the same day that Trump got into a Twitter fight with Chuck Schumer after Schumer asked him to appoint someone with a military background to be SAR of the crisis.
We go over that with Administrator Gaynor and Admiral Polovchik. We talk about an extensive team that's identifying supplies around the country and around the world. And then, as we were explaining to governors today, we work with the requests that are coming in from states with a priority on the areas that are dealing with widespread outbreak, like the greater New York City area, New Jersey, Louisiana, focus on Detroit, focus on Chicago and Illinois. And then what Pete Gaynor and Admiral Polovchik are doing is directing those commercial distributors to send the resources directly to the front lines of the battle against the coronavirus.
Now, in terms of sending those resources, Admiral Polovchik revealed to the shock of many the other day that 80% of these supplies are not being supplied directly to the state governments. Instead, they're being given to the private sector. And as a result, Governor Cuomo has needed to do an executive order to be able to take control of some of these items from these private institutions.
Expense, leave no stone unturned, and use this extraordinary apparatus centered in FEMA to get the people of our country what they need, when they need it, to battle the coronavirus.
And Kristen, when Schumer makes a statement like that, he's only doing it for politics. He knows. We have the best generals, the best admirals, we have the best people. These are incredible leaders. These are vibrant people. They've done such a good job. And again, you'll get a tape of the conversation because I'm sure some of the governors probably had their favorite reporter listening to the conversation, even though they weren't supposed to, but that's happened before. Just so you understand, we had a call today that was a beautiful call, everybody friendly, everybody happy. They also know in some cases we'll get them a little bit more, and if they need it, we'll get them a lot more depending on where this monster is going. But when Schumer does that, take a look at the past. Well, you know, you're going to have to tell me who. They certainly don't. Well, yeah, some Democrats, because they view this as a campaign issue. They want to make Trump look as bad as they can because they want to try and win an election that they shouldn't be allowed to win based on the fact that we have done a great job.
The president, with no evidence, is claiming that in the midst of a national crisis, Democratic governors in the states hardest hit by the pandemic are lying about the numbers and about their equipment so that they can make the President of the United States look bad. That is a shocking allegation for the President of the United States to make without offering evidence to back it up. I suspect that the governor of New York is more concerned with the 130,000 coronavirus patients in his state than in making Trump look bad. I imagine that the governor of New Jersey is more concerned with the 41,000 coronavirus patients in his state than in making Trump look bad.
It's a disgrace. And he knows it's done. He just wants to do that. But he knows the job we're doing. Everybody's amazed at the job we're doing. And the public is starting to find out. One of the reasons I do these news conferences, because if I didn't, they would believe fake news. And we can't let them believe fake news. They see us up here. They see us with admirals. They see us with this talent. They see the job that Mike Pence has done, which has been an unbelievable job.
When the president says that everyone is amazed by the job that he's doing, this is partly true, but not in the sense that he means it. Multiple public health experts have called out the administration's response as a failure. Greg Gonzalez of the Yale Global Health Justice Partnership told CNN this weekend that this will go down in history as one of the greatest public health failures in 100 years. The director of the Harvard School of Public Health also highlighted this as an unprecedented failure. Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor of Barack Obama, said that at least 10,000 additional people are dying because of President Trump's management of this crisis. I also want to point out, you might be able to hear, it is 7 p.m. here in New York, and New Yorkers have taken to their windows to cheer the brave nurses, doctors, and first responders who are on the front line of this crisis.
Security question, and then a question about Governor Cuomo. On the national security front, to the extent that you can comment on this, your administration is making heavy preparations to move against the cartels in Latin America right now. And could you
said
expand,
Latin America?
Yes. Could you expand on the reasoning of why now? Are there supply and logistics especially weak? Is it political?
Yeah.
What's the reasoning?
It's a good question. We've moved a tremendous number of boats and ships to the area of, different areas of exactly where you're talking about, because we're tired of drugs pouring into our country from other places. And we're tired of seeing drugs pouring into different parts of Latin America, South America, and just coming into our country. Now we've got them stopped at the border, and they're trying to do it by sea. So we stop them at the border and frankly, with the help of Mexico. Mexico right now has 27,000 soldiers on our southern border. They never had any soldiers. They're doing that because I've asked them to do it. That's the only reason they're doing it. They have 27,000 soldiers. So now they're trying to bring it in by boat and by ship, the drug lords and the people doing drugs and trying to destroy our country from inside with drugs. And we're hitting them very, very hard. And that's why we're doing it.
Activities that U.S. assets are targeting, or
Say it?
is it beyond narcotics? Are there other illicit activities that
Well,
U.S. assets are
there are
targeting?
the activities of human trafficking, and especially with respect to women. As you know, proportionally, it's mostly women. And it's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. And there's never been a time like it. And it's because of the internet. And this is all over the world. But for the most part, they're coming through, in this country, they're coming through the southern border. But we're hitting them very hard.
This is not true. I'll pull up the actual stat on that in a minute, but it is simply not true that the majority of human trafficking is coming across the southern border.
An absolute disgrace. And we're trying to knock them out, and we're knocking them hard. And again, I want to thank the president of Mexico because he has really stepped up to the plate. 27,000 soldiers. They've never had any soldiers on our border. And I did that because the Democrats will not approve anything to stop, because they want to have open borders. They want to have all these people flowing through our border. And in many cases, they're sick. They have problems that you don't want to know about.
The president is claiming that Democrats want open borders. That is not true. And he's also suggesting that that sickness is coming across the border, clearly playing into fears that people have right now with the coronavirus. Again, I would like to remind you that our southern neighbor has less than 1/10 of the cases of coronavirus that we do here in the U.S.
Trafficking, we're doing it because you have to do it. We either have borders or we don't have a country. All right, go ahead, please.
The president is frequently using these border conversations to fearmonger. He's repeatedly suggesting that our drug problems are all based on what is coming across the border. The fact of the matter is that there were at least 46,000 opioid overdose deaths in 2018 that were the result of prescription drug use, and you don't see that the President of the United States attacking prescription drug companies the way he is attacking these so-called invading hordes across the border.
Approved is not a word we talk about. There is a test or two that has received emergency use authorization, and many, many, many others out there that have not gone that way yet. And I want to take this opportunity to caution. There is a very consolidated effort between the FDA, CDC, NIH to validate some of the tests that are on the market right now, because it is very important that they actually do what they say they do. And we have reason to believe that not all of them are going to perform well. I don't know the primary source, but the Financial Times just reported that the UK had 17.5 million antibody tests that they bought, and none of them work. So we're not going to get in that situation. We're going to be very careful to make sure that when we tell you you're likely immune from the disease, that test really said that. Now, I will also make a statement, and there's a lot of work on here, and I'm very excited about it. As opposed to the tests for a novel virus, the antibody type tests are very sophisticated technology, but they're old technology. This we expect to have many tens of millions of tests the first month that we are really sure that the test makes sense. So this allows for surveillance screening, and Dr. Birx is one of the world experts to understand, is 1%, 5%, 20% of Americans have been infected. But it also allows us to have very widespread tens and tens of millions of people screened with a finger prick on the spot.
By when? Just to be, so by May you're saying this will happen? Or
Science doesn't run on rails, right? So we need to make sure that the FDA, the NIH, which they're actively doing right now, assure that the tests that they're testing really do perform the way they should. And if things work out the way we believe they will, we will have millions on the market by May in a sophisticated way, in a prospective way, that we get the surveillance we need. We can test people to see if they've been exposed, immune, and go back to work. And a combination of that kind of test with the current kind of test we have now is how America opens back up again.
How do you prioritize who gets those tests? I mean, tens of million, we're a country of 300 million. How do you determine who you're going to have that test?
Well, we are having active discussions under the leadership of Dr. Birx and the task force, but you can imagine how that is, right? But with tens and tens and tens of millions of tests per month that are available, you could really do very widespread testing. But
it is important to note again that in February, South Korea was doing widespread testing and was testing 15,000 people a day before the U.S. had even tested its first 15,000, and that when the World Health Organization offered tests to the U.S. turned them down.
Don't have the virus and you don't have the virus. So it's complex, but it's not complicated on how you go about looking this in different segments of society. And I don't want to take too much more time with the podium, but antibody tests are a different thing. They're coming. We're highly confident that this can be scaled very rapidly and provide us a bit of information we just don't have now.
Jeff, go ahead.
Mr. President, may I follow up on
A
what
few
you
more.
said?
We'll do a few more.
May I,
And then Mike is taking over, and you're going to see some incredible work that's been done. Go ahead, please.
may I please follow up on what you said?
I do, since we were just hearing from Admiral Girard, I just do want to offer a little bit more information from him. He's been under a lot of scrutiny for his record. Senator Patty Murray of Washington objected last year to his, quote, track record of letting ideology drive decisions at the expense of women and families. He was reportedly a driving force behind the decision for the NIH to stop fetal tissue research, which jeopardized some of the most promising medical research.
So number one, they get worried and scared. It was weak. We don't want weak. But I'm going to take a look because I think he, looks to me like he's an outstanding guy. I looked at his whole, just a little while ago, I looked at his file. And people have bad days, and we'll take a look at it.
I guess my question is, what would you consider doing for him?
Well, we'll take a look. I want to speak also to the Secretary. I also want to speak to Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper is doing a fantastic job. And we'll, maybe I can help the situation out. I mean, you guys are saying, why is the president getting involved? And going, well, I like to solve problems. It's a problem, I don't want to see men hurt, women hurt. I don't want to see people hurt unnecessarily. Maybe we can solve it easily where, it's not life-changing. But he did a bad thing, sending a letter out, and many, many copies, as you know. I don't know, I heard 28 copies, I heard a lot. That's a lot of copies. Plus the letter was 5 pages long. I haven't read the letter, but I think it was 5 pages long, single-spaced. That's a lot of writing. He's the captain of a ship. He's a very important person of a very expensive ship, a nuclear-powered ship. He should be writing letters like that.
This letter that President Trump is attacking Captain Brett Crozier for writing, I just want to quote a line from it. He said, "Sailors do not need to die. If we do not act now, we are failing to properly take care of our most trusted asset, our sailors." He was asking for the ability to implement quarantine and isolation procedures because the virus was spreading on his ship.
Tough language, but I don't want to, let's not get into that. It's tough language. Now, there are some people that think, oh, wow, he says it like it is. Look, he made a mistake. He should not have sent that letter. Or he should have gone through his chain of command, which is the typical way of doing it. He's in the military. He's a very important person in the military. He knows it better than anybody in this room what he should have done. And I'm sure he feels he made a mistake. But I'm going to look into it, and I'm going to see maybe we can do something, because I'm not looking to destroy a person's life who's had an otherwise stellar career, as I understand it. I looked at his file just now because I've been seeing what's going on. If we can save person's career. I don't mind going after a person if they did something wrong. And, but this was a mistake. He made a mistake. I'm not justifying what he did. He made a mistake. Shouldn't be sending letters. He's the captain. He's a very important person in the military. You don't send letters and then it leaks into a newspaper of all newspapers. That was a beauty, right? So you just don't do that. So it was a mistake. But I may get involved. I'll call Secretary of Defense and find out a little bit about it.
Just a reminder that last year President Trump pardoned a Navy SEAL convicted of war crimes. He seems to have less sympathy for a captain of a vessel trying to save the lives of his crew than for a SEAL who commits war crimes. And it was, according to both the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, it was Trump who first called for the firing of Captain Crozier.
That has played right up here with me is that I looked at his record, and he's been an outstanding person. If he wasn't, I wouldn't even be talking about this. He's been an outstanding person. He's had a very exemplary military career. I mean, he started off as a helicopter pilot. They called him Chopper. His name was Chopper. He was a great helicopter pilot. It's a tremendous skill. I know a lot about helicopters. And then he went to F-16s or F-18s, and he was a tremendous pilot.
While President Trump has often flown in helicopters, there is no evidence suggesting that he actually knows a lot about helicopters.
Nuclear energy is very complex, it's very hard. Very few people can do it. And he did it well. And then he became the captain of a nuclear ship, right? He became if replacement cost, if you look at replacement cost, $18 billion a replacement cost, right? So he's got, on a replacement cost basis, an $18 billion ship. The President Gerald Ford, very expensive. That's, the nearest thing I can think of, but they're spending money on that one like nobody's ever seen. So he made a mistake. He made a mistake. And maybe we're going to make that mistake, not destroy his life. Okay, a couple of more.
President, you mentioned medical professionals. You compared them to soldiers going onto the battlefield.
Yeah.
Many doctors and medical workers today, some have seen pay cuts. They're going into a certain environment where they're concerned about their own health, their families' livelihood, if something were to happen to them.
Very much in my mind.
As part of this phase 4, are you going to prioritize?
It doesn't have to be phase 4. I think it could be a separate phase when it's all over. Right now, I don't think they want to think about it. These people don't want to think about it. These people are incredible. They're not thinking about how much am I getting paid. These people are incredible. I've seen it. I see.
The president is correct. The nurses and doctors and first responders putting their lives at risk are incredible. It is important, again, to remember that he spent much of last week suggesting that they were stealing medical equipment. Also, he repeatedly compares them to warriors, and we have seen nurses being forced to wear garbage bags because they didn't have protective gowns. It is hard to imagine that the U.S. would go to war and have soldiers using garbage bags as protections because they didn't have flak jackets.
You're going to be splitting up, but, a lot of things happen to ships when you do that. It's a lot of, they didn't want to do this. In fact, they specifically didn't want to do this. Have patients that were affected with this horrible disease or whatever, the plague, because frankly it's a plague. That's exactly what it is. You'd read about it in the old days, the plague, and that's exactly what it is. But we're doing it. But when I see the bravery of these people walking through doors without their stuff, I mean, they're just getting, they're not standing outside, hey, let's get ready, they're running through doors, putting on the stuff it's not even on. I think it's incredible. I'm telling you, the nearest...
What the president is describing is probably not something that he's actually witnessed, because that would indeed be putting lives at risk, not only their own lives, but the lives of patients, if medical professionals were indeed walking into rooms where they were seeing patients without having fully put on their protective gear.
I hope football's able to start. I hope baseball can get to play a little bit. I hope basketball can maybe do their playoffs. I mean, hey, I have no interests or anything other than I want what's good for the country.
What about the U.S.
A lot of
Open,
people
which
are
you've attended
tired.
many times?
Yeah, a lot of people are tired of looking at games that are 5 years old. I looked the other day, I saw somebody, I said, wow, he looks great. I forgot. I said, oh, that was 9 years ago. I said, he's really in great shape. Well, not in great shape now, but he was in great shape then. It was 9 years ago. You get tired of looking at 9-year-old baseball games and playoff games that took place 12 years ago. I don't have much time to do that, frankly, but that's what people are doing. And they want to see sports. Sports are a great thing for this country. And I hope football can start. And I told them, I think you might be able to. They may very well be able to. I hope they can start. And I hope they can start with people in the stands. We're not going to be separated. You have seats. Those seats are meant for people to sit next to each other. And when this virus is gone, people are going to be sitting next to each other. And just for the restaurant industry, so they understand, when the virus is gone, people are going to be sitting next to each other. One man said, I have a 200-seat restaurant. It's been great. But if I go by these rules, this 200 seats goes down to 60. I said, no. You have a 200-seat restaurant. That's what you have. But we have to wait till the virus goes away. It wouldn't even do well at 60. Frankly, there's a warmth to it also. There's a warmth. But not when we have the virus in the air. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. So I'm going to let our Vice President take over. He's got some really interesting numbers, statistics. And I want to thank the Admiral. I want to thank Tony and Deborah and everybody else. I want to thank everybody that's working. And I really do. I see a lot of tremendous things happen. The therapeutics, the call I had today was one of the most exciting calls I've had in a long time. And again, I want to wish my best to the UK.
I'm looking it up, but we are at the moment unable to verify that it is that President Trump really did have a conversation with the owner of a 200-seat restaurant about how he would be impacted by the disease. We're now handing it over to Mike Pence, who is the leader of the task force. Mike Pence, who, as I have mentioned before, oversaw as a result of his public health policies, the worst HIV outbreak in the history of his state when he was governor of Indiana.
But as Dr. Birx will reflect, because the American people have been embracing social distancing, putting into practice the advice of state and local leaders and the president's coronavirus guidelines for our country. As Dr. Birx will describe, we are not only seeing remarkable progress in Washington State and in California, where the numbers remain low and steady. That's a great tribute to the people of both of those states and to all of their dedicated healthcare workers. But we're also beginning to see a leveling, just at the very beginning. And she'll reflect on those in just a few moments. A couple of quick updates. At the present moment, the President has approved 50 major disaster declarations, and we'll likely be issuing a disaster declaration for the state of Minnesota before the end of the day. We've distributed more than $4.1 billion to states, and right after our incredible healthcare workers, we couldn't be more proud of more than 21,000 National Guard that have been activated and are working in states all across the country. During my conference call today, I learned that Governor Brian Kemp is actually using the Georgia National Guard to sanitize and clean up nursing homes. But National Guard are being deployed in a variety of ways all across the country, and to them and to the families of all these citizen soldiers, you have our admiration and our respect. As the President mentioned, our focus remains on the New York metro area, New Jersey, Louisiana, and then Michigan and Illinois. We're watching every area of the country, but those are the priorities today. And in that spirit, I spoke today, as the President did, with Governor Cuomo of New York. The President made the decision to open up the USNS Comfort to COVID patients. And he also informed the governor of New Jersey that we would be taking New Jersey COVID patients. So now there will be two facilities, one at the Javits Center that's all COVID, and in the USNS Comfort that will be managing COVID patients.
One thing I do want to butt in to say, Scott McEachran from our newsroom was able to confirm that President Trump did indeed have a call with several famous chefs on Sunday. So that is likely one of those chefs that he was referring to in that conversation.
While we have surged ventilators, we have surged personal protective equipment, that sending in some relief for healthcare workers was vitally important. And so again, I want to emphasize that those are medical.
But a little more info about the chefs he spoke to. They were restaurateur Daniel Boulud and Wolfgang Puck, among others. Boulud's net worth is $12 million. Wolfgang Puck's is reportedly $90 million. So while there may indeed have been a conversation with restaurant owners about the impact of the coronavirus, it is unlikely that they are in dire financial straits as a result of it.
Activate retired healthcare personnel in the state. And just as a reminder of all that we're dealing with this weekend, Governor Murphy told me that New Jersey surpassed the number of lives that were lost on September 11th to the state of New Jersey. And it breaks our heart to think of that. And our hearts go out to all of the families of the more than 10,000 Americans who have succumbed to the coronavirus. We also, as the President said, we express our gratitude to governors in Oregon and Washington State yesterday for donating ventilators to help the states at the epicenter of the coronavirus. Governor Gavin Newsom of California donated 500 ventilators. And I just learned that those will be going 200 to the state of Maryland, 50 to the District of Columbia, 100 to the state of Delaware, 100 to Nevada, and we'll also be deploying the remaining 50 to the Northern Marianas Islands and to Guam. And we want to thank...
Those are ventilators coming from the state of California. It's also, we reported yesterday that Oregon sent ventilators to New York. It is striking that the governors of states are jumping in where the president and the federal government are not taking the lead to help their neighbor states resolve their own crises.
We want to challenge every American to continue to do what every American can do. And clearly, what we see in Washington and California, and what we are just beginning to see elsewhere, is put into practice the social distancing recommendations of the coronavirus guidelines for America. Listen to your state and local authorities.
Well, he's urging people to listen to their state and local authorities. Of course, the president has stopped short of setting a nationwide stay-at-home order, so that while these are just suggestions, they aren't more than that. It is also striking that the president himself refuses to abide by much of the instructions he's giving to others. On the same day that he announced that Americans should wear masks when they go out in public, he announced that he would not do so, and even though he advises people to avoid groups of more than 10, he has been inviting business leaders to the White House to hold meetings of more than 10 people when these meetings could have been conducted by phone. And you will see in every one of these briefings that he is typically standing closer than 6 feet to his fellow task force members.
Weekend numbers are always difficult. I want to be clear on that because sometimes case reporting is not as accurate over the weekend. So we'll be watching very closely today's numbers and Tuesday's numbers. We're also very course focused on the New Orleans metro area, and that includes the 3 parishes of Jefferson, St. John's the Baptist, and New Orleans proper, and of course the Detroit area, which is Oakland and Wayne. As we mentioned before, we're continuing to track very closely out of concerns of it potentially reaching logarithmic phase in the Chicago metro area, the Boston metro area, the DC and Baltimore metro area, Indianapolis, the Denver area, and 2 regions of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia and the Pittsburgh area, as well as Dallas and Houston in the Texas area. I had a very encouraging call because we also don't want to miss anything. Remember, I showed you a lot of states were very much under 25 and 50 cases per 100,000. There were a few standouts that we were concerned about, which was Vermont, New Hampshire, Idaho, and Montana. We had excellent calls today with their health commissioners, and they're they're on top of the situation. These were micro outbreaks that occurred due to ski events and weddings and nursing homes, and they were able to describe in critical detail the incidents and how they're tracking and tracing. So they are still doing full contact tracing through those areas, and I just want to applaud both a rural and metro problem, and I really want to applaud how many of the states that may have smaller populations are approaching this. That gives us encouragement of how we can talk about beginning surveillance activities at the same time we're following these very clear outbreaks and ensuring that there's full supplies based on the very granular data that we're utilizing. And I just want to thank the mayors and governors who get us that granular data and allows us to make these deep interpretations across all of the United States. We know each governor is concerned about their areas, but these metro areas cover different areas. So the Philadelphia area also includes southern New Jersey and Delaware, and so we have to really look at things very much as both the metro and the communities that surround those metros. And so all of those people, we ask you again throughout the United States to follow these very clear guidance. I want to just recognize both HHS, and you heard about the work that Admiral Giroir is doing, the work that Dr. Hahn and Administrator Seema Verma are doing, and also Administrator Engels in the work of HRSA to really ensure that our federally funded clinics are actively engaged in all of these aspects. But I also want to recognize the military, the medical corps, the nursing corps, and the medical subspecialty corps. These were my brothers and sisters for 29 years. It is highly unusual for the active force to be called into a domestic situation. I think that shows you how seriously we're taking this at the federal government level. In my 29 years in the military, I was never deployed domestically. So this is showing you how serious of an event we take this. If the military is deploying domestically, it is another reason for every American to be following these guidelines. Finally, CDC quietly launched a new website. It's you go to cdc.gov and you go to COVID-19, you can find their surveillance data. This surveillance data is bringing together our influenza-like illnesses with their syndromic management databases so that you can track the respiratory disease across the United States. The states are used to using this system. It's in emergency rooms, it's in hospitals, it's in doctors' offices, and it gives you insight, and you can see very clearly influenza A peak, you can see the influenza B peak, and now you can start to see the respiratory disease from this current outbreak. These are the systems that exist within the United States that will be strengthened in order for us to do comprehensive surveillance. So I just want to assure the American people, while we're working on these outbreaks, we're also working on bringing new systems together that have a comprehensive look across the country, building on the strong work of CDC as a public health institution so that we can work county by county, community by community, state by state to really understand where this virus is and where it will be, but also as an early alert for us in the future. So I just want to assure the American people that as we're working on the crisis of today, we're looking to the future to ensure we have the systems in place to bring those early alert systems together while we work on the antibody testing and while we work on continuing spreading and increasing the diagnostic capabilities that you see presented here. Thank you.
Dr. Birx was highlighting the importance of planning for the future and leaving future administrations with a plan for how to deal with something like this if it ever happens again. It is striking to note that the last administration did that for this administration, leaving behind the pandemic playbook and creating the Global Health Security Unit within the National Security Council. Unfortunately, those advanced preparations were discarded by this administration.
Engine of this virus is starting to show some signs. So Governor Cuomo today reported an interesting data from New York, namely that the number of hospitalizations, the number of admissions to intensive care, and the number of requirements for intubations over the last 3 days have actually started to level off. So again, everybody who knows me knows I'm very conservative about making projections, but those are the kind of good signs that you look for. You never even begin to think about claiming victory prematurely, but that's the first thing you see when you start to see the turnaround. That doesn't mean we don't have a lot of work to do. That tells me, instead of saying, that's pretty good, it's we got there through mitigation. We cut off the stream of people who ultimately required hospitalization, required intubation, required all of the kinds of extreme methods. So we just got to realize that this is an indication, despite all the suffering and the death that has occurred, that what we have been doing has been working. So the call that I say every time I get to this podium is just keep it up, because this is going to get us out of it. This is our best and only great public health tool.
And are we starting to see that across many states? We're seeing the level of hospitalizations and deaths is lower than what we anticipated.
Well, you're going to see it most dramatically, John, in a place like New York, where you see it goes up and peak, and then it will hopefully, and I think it will, come down. When you have places like Seattle, which did and Washington State, who did a really good job from the beginning, it never really did that, so they were able to keep it down. And on the charts that Dr. Berg showed, when you saw California and Washington State, they were fortunate, they did a good job, that it never really got out of hand. So again, this is a big country, and you have a number of different metropolitan areas. I think if we do it right, you're going to see those who have not peaked will not peak, and those who have peaked, the New Orleans, the New York, New Jersey, Chicago, Detroit, and others, you're going to see the same thing if we keep our foot on the accelerator.
Further questions for the team?
Yes, sir. I'm just following up Dr. Fauci's comment earlier about what it's like going to be coming back to normal, and until there's a vaccine, that there'll be gradual steps towards restoring normalcy. Under that, short of a vaccine, does putting 80,000 people, fans, spectators in a sports stadium, or 25,000 politicos in an arena for a political convention this summer make a lot of sense? Or does those sorts of things require a vaccine to fully protect the American populace?
No, I don't think that you're going to have to say that the country cannot get back to a real degree of normalcy until you absolutely have a safe and effective vaccine. It will be really evaluating the kinds of things, and that's the reason why it was discussed up here, why it's so important to have an antibody test so you know what the penetrance is in society. And then we have a situation where we don't ever want to get to have to mitigate. We want it to be able to contain. And by the time we have to face what's going to happen with this going back to normalcy, we will have in place the capability of identifying, isolating, contact tracing, so that it never gets out of hand. Ultimately, the showstopper will be obviously a vaccine where you can vaccinate people and you won't have it. There's going to be another issue that's going to be important, and it has to do with somewhat of a comparison, for example, with influenza. We go through multiple cycles of influenza. There's always a degree of background immunity in the population. I mean, that will ultimately happen if we get a situation where we get back to normal. Now, I hope we don't have so many people infected that we actually have that herd immunity, but I think it would have to be different than it is right now. So again, remember when you say normalcy, I mean, we could get back normally, economically and otherwise, without necessarily saying we're going to forget about the virus. We have to pay attention to this because we've had a very bad experience with this virus.
Follow up on that, please.
Thank you, and this is for the Vice President, for Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci, but can you give us a sense of, and I know you don't want to make any projections, but where we are with the numbers, because we saw that horrible number today, more than 10,000 deaths now in the U.S. Are we on track for those best case scenario numbers that you had laid out, the 100,000, or are we potentially coming in lower than that at this point, given some of what you're seeing?
You know, it just gives me an opportunity to thank and respect the modelers who have really worked on this, because there's a large number of them have worked very hard and done a lot of predictions. And what we did is we did predictions of predictions. We like to integrate data, and so that's where you come up with these numbers. I think Dr. Fauci and I both strongly believe that if we work as hard as we can over the next several weeks, that we will see potential to go under the numbers that were predicted by the models. And I think that is really two things. It is the extraordinary compliance of the American people and the diligence that they have mitigated with. Because remember, we are doing this strictly by behavior change. It's very hard to change trajectory of viruses on just behavior change. We have had difficulty in our past doing that. So that's what we're doing, and that's what the American people are doing. But the other side of that is the incredible insights that Washington State and others are providing on how to better care for the patients in the hospital. And so those two pieces are coming together that could have a dramatic impact on the predictions of the mortality from this disease.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because I've said it a couple of times here. I want to say it again. Repetition is good. Is that models are good. They help us to make projections. But as you get data in, you modify your model. And I've always said, data always trumps models, always. So what I feel, and I believe that Dr. Birx also feels, that I don't think anyone has ever mitigated the way I'm seeing people mitigate right now. This has never happened in this country before. So I am optimistic, always cautiously optimistic, that if we do what I've been talking about over the past few minutes, we can make that number go down. I don't accept every day that we're going to have 100 to 200,000 deaths. I think we can really bring that down, no matter what a model says, because when the data comes in, it'll start to say, you know, maybe you are essentially overshooting the model. And I think that's where we can go. That's the reason why I like to always get up and tell the American people, it's the virus doing what the virus wants to do, and it's we as a society doing what we can do.
And let me just amplify that from a layperson's perspective. And the American people are doing it. I mean, the initial data, what we've seen in California and Washington, support the fact that the American people are doing these things, which is nothing short of loving your neighbor. I mean, the truth is, the threat of serious illness for most Americans is relatively low. But the threat of serious illness for seniors with underlying health conditions or anyone with an immunodeficiency is very high. And when we see Americans putting these principles into practice the way you all have been, it really means you're considering others more important than yourself.
Now, at the same time that the Vice President is highlighting all of the people who are doing the right thing, there are a lot of people who are not doing the right thing. We have shared this evening a video of people who insist on going to church services, thereby putting their fellow parishioners at risk. And a pastor in Florida who was a frequent guest at the White House has actually been arrested for insisting on holding megachurch services in Tampa Bay.
And as we begin to see a couple of days that might be the beginning of leveling, we're gonna watch that carefully, and we're gonna bring that information to the president. But for now, the decision is, and the request of every American is to continue to put into practice all of the President's coronavirus guidelines, 30 days to slow the spread. And for all of you in areas that have been impacted broadly by the coronavirus, listen to what your state and local authorities are asking you to do. It will protect your health, your family's health, and it will save lives. Let's do a couple more, and for our panel, if you'd like. Jeff.
More of a personal question, but Dr. Burks, can you tell us if your granddaughter's okay? And
yeah, I'd like to know too.
Well, thank you. Due to the great care of my 91-year-old nurse mother and my daughter, she's down to like 100 to 99 now, but it was 3 days of 104 and 105, which is, you know, babies can do that, but it's very scary, especially when I couldn't assure myself that she was fine. So it was just some sleepless nights for me and them as they kept her fever down. So thank you for asking.
You have this virus?
Oh, no, I'm sure it's roseola or something. They have not been out of the house. They're not allowed out of the house. They've got 2 granddaughters under 1, 2.5 almost, and 1 only 10 months, and my 91-year-old and 96-year-old. So no one is allowed in that house or out of that house because there's too much precious cargo inside the house.
How about one more question? We'll let
Thank
you
you,
all.
Mr. Vice President. For whoever wants to answer this, it's a technical question. So FEMA says that it is in the process of distributing 90% of each state's allocated supplies for the National Strategic Stockpile. And that allocation is determined based on population by the last census in each state. And the other 10%, it says, is going to frontline healthcare workers serving in the federal response efforts.
By the way, that is an important reminder of why you need to fill out your census. It could make the difference between whether your community gets life-saving aid or not.
You know, it's a really good question. And let me say the Strategic National Stockpile, and I'm going to have Admiral Giroir speak about his piece of that, has been largely deployed. We are continuing to replenish it in part with a small portion of what's coming in from around the world. You've heard about our air bridge, now more than 50 flights that have been scheduled that are bringing millions of supplies into the United States. What we're doing is taking less than 10% of that, put it into the Strategic National Stockpile, so we have that to basically provide for states on an as-needed basis. But
it does remain that our stockpile is low because even when the Pentagon warned of insufficient supplies in the national stockpile in 2017, this administration did not act to refill them. And even when the National Security Council was briefed on December 31st or January 3rd on the emergence of this threat, this administration did not start at that time rebuilding the stockpile.
Florida or tornadoes or flooding tear through the state of Indiana. We're very accustomed to FEMA coming in, drawing from the national stockpile, providing specific resources. In this case, with a nationwide effort, what President Trump directed us to do was literally marshal the resources of the full economy to be able to make sure that we can meet the needs for personal protective equipment, ventilators, and all manner of supplies. And we're doing that in a small way through the Strategic National Stockpile, but in the largest way through that control tower system that Admiral John Plavsic is running for us, that is deploying those resources and making sure they're going straight to where they need to go. And as I said earlier, those decisions are being informed by the data, and they're literally being made by our team at FEMA on a daily and sometimes hourly basis. And we'll continue to keep you informed, as we did today, about where some of those are going. But let me let Admiral Giroir finish that answer.
I don't really have much more to add to that. The Vice President is certainly well informed about that. And I want to assure you that all the sourcing around the world, if it's there, we're putting it in our supply chains. We're buying more. Manufacturers are stepping up to the plate. And this is going not just by allocation, but it's going to the exact places that need it in the quantities that they need to take care of patients. And we want...
He's saying that it is going to these areas in the quantities that they need, but as we have previously gotten into, multiple governors are saying that they do not have what they need. And as the Inspector General of Health and Human Services revealed today, hospitals across the country are facing severe shortages of personal protective equipment, ventilators, testing supplies, and staff. President Trump mocked this report by the Inspector General, but this was based on accounts from 323 hospitals in 46 states.
He is a wizard. He has there are more stars around me in the DoD part of the military than I've generally seen outside of the Pentagon. This is really being run as a military operation. I'm in the U.S. Public Health Service, so we're part of HHS. The Surgeon General and I have the honor of running that service. We are shoulder to shoulder in the field, in the military hospitals with everyone else. There are only 6,100 of us. 3,000 are doing direct patient care on a daily basis. We take care of the Indian Health Service, the Bureau of Prisons, those in detention at the border, et cetera. That's what we do. The other 3,000, over 2,000 of those are in the field already, taking care of patients directly, and we have more going out the door every day.
And if I could just follow up on that very quickly then, is it even worth then governors writing into FEMA if they've already received their 90% allocation and you're getting data directly from the hospitals to ask for more at this point?
This has been a very cooperative interaction. I bet I talk to 5 governors a day, and we talk out the issues and understand what they perceive in their state. They often help point us to particular areas that they feel need more attention or that needs more communication. So it's been very productive. I have to look up what governor goes to what state because that's not my world, but it's been a very productive interaction. So I think all of this is necessary. I'm on almost every governor's call with the vice president. They're very meaningful, they're impactful, they're informative, they're communicative. We talk to each other, but then we do get down to the individual hospital level because when the rubber meets the road, you got to know what the docs, nurses, respiratory therapists, the people who clean the rooms are an important part of the team. I want them to come to every work saying, it's not that I clean a room, I'm saving lives today. And they are saving lives by keeping the viruses off the surfaces and reducing transmission. So you've really got to get that granular, and we're to a point with Admiral P's. You have 2 admirals with the worst pronounced names in the world, so Admiral P, Admiral G, but Admiral P's team really has this covered down to the individual hospital level.
Thank you, sir.
Let me say, just by way of closing, because I thought that last question was helpful. We're interacting with governors every day, 7 days a week, and we welcome that. And while there are some resources in Strategic National Reserve, we spoke about ventilators. We have some 9,000 ventilators on standby. We also have this vast array through the commercial system that when we hear from governors, we're identifying the needs. They're working every day to identify their hospital capacity. We went over governors today saying we need to know what your capacity is, what your normal capacity is, what your surge capacity is. We need to understand what your equipment complement is across the state. And governors have been doing this. They've been assembling that information. But I want to tell you, the governors across this country in both political parties have been doing a remarkable job. And the president's grateful, and I'm grateful. And I just want to know that those healthcare...
This is reassuring to hear the Vice President praise governors of both parties. It is noticeable how President Trump is eager to praise Republican governors, even though many of them have presided over less robust responses to the coronavirus. I'm thinking specifically the governors of Florida, Georgia, and Texas, all of whom he's praised this evening, while he has called the governor of Washington, who has presided over what is now appearing to be one of the most successful responses to the coronavirus. He called that governor a snake. He called the governor of Michigan that woman and suggested that Vice President Pence should not even speak to her. And he has accused Governor Pritzker of Illinois of failing the state, and has several times in today's briefing suggested that these governors are lying about their needs to make him look bad.
What these healthcare workers, doctors and nurses and medical assistants are doing every day, it inspires us to get up early, to stay up late, to keep working, to make sure they have what they need to be able to continue to do their job courageously. And I know I speak on behalf of every American when I say how grateful we are for each and every one of you. And in this very special Holy Week, I know millions of Americans are praying for our healthcare workers. I saw a picture that I sent out last night on Twitter. It was an article about a series of cities where doctors and nurses had paused to pray for the patients and the families that they were ministering to. And I just want to say to all those healthcare workers, I know there is a chorus of prayer going up every day for all of you. And with your continued courageous service and with God's help, we'll get through this. And we'll get through it together. Thank you all.
And that concludes today's Coronavirus Task Force briefing. It was perhaps somewhat less combative than yesterday's. I guess that's grading on a curve. This comes at a time when, as was highlighted, we do have encouraging news. The rate, while the death toll in New York is staggering, over 4,700, the rate of deaths and the rate of hospitalizations has either plateaued or possibly slowed in the past 2 days. So that is a cause for hope. Of course, at the same time that I mentioned that, I'm checking the latest numbers, and I see that in the time that we were carrying this briefing today, at least 10,000 new cases have been diagnosed in the world. And so we are balancing between hope. We've been offered some hope, but there is also the awareness that even in the best case scenario, a lot of people are going to be lost and a lot of people are going to suffer. And one of the most painful things is that the response of this nation has contributed to a greater loss of life than was necessary. As the former National Security Advisor said today, that the time between when this administration became aware of this crisis and actually took action was, she said, quote, a wasted 2 months, and those 2 months have meant the difference between tens of thousands of Americans dying who might not otherwise have died. As I mentioned earlier, Greg Gonsalves of the Yale Global Health Justice Partnership described this as the greatest public health failure in 100 years. And Ashish Jha, the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute, called the U.S. response an unmitigated disaster that this administration has brought upon the population, and said that the U.S. response was, quote, worse than Iran, than Italy, than China, and South Korea. So these are difficult and painful times, but we will hold on to the hope that these new numbers from New York is offering to us, and we will, as a people, get through this together. I am Alan Piper, the senior politics producer at NowThis. I was aided today by Amna Ahmad, Emily Barger, Zara Heder, Scout McEachran, Versha Sharma, and Shelby Vaculin. One bit of news that broke while we were broadcasting, the governor of Wisconsin had attempted to postpone tomorrow's elections and primary in Wisconsin, and the state Supreme Court has barred him from doing that. So despite the ongoing public health crisis, Wisconsin will be voting tomorrow. So that is some startling news. At least 14 states have postponed their primaries as a result of this crisis. We will get through this together. NowThis will continue to try to give you the best possible information. Please stay safe. Please follow the guidance of public health officials. Stay inside. Wash your hands. Stay a safe distance away from other people. And please, please use this opportunity to let the people you love know how much you love them. Thank you. I will see you tomorrow. Have a good and safe night.